All right, welcome to The Greater Wealth. I'm your host, Travis Carter, back again. Had a few internet issues, but I hope I've resolved them. So, what we're going to do, we're going to go from more streamlined and more factual, straight to the point, hard hitting episode today with our co host, guest presenter, all around lumberjack, awesome dude. We've got Derek Whitaker to my right, all the way in Perth. Obviously, I'm in Halong at the moment. How you going, Derek?
I'm well. How are you, Travis?
I'm recovering from the flu, but I'm good. So I do have a cough lolly just in case. So anyway, let's get into it. I'm excited. I'm happy.
There's a lot going on in the world at the moment. Lots of conflict going on, and mainly the headlines are talking up the whole change of the barrel of oil, what the price is on Brent oil, etc. I see those fluctuations in the market all the time, so I kind of go, I don't really make that big a deal about it, and that's because coming from more of a trader perspective on this whole situation where we see major swings on different assets at different times. But yes, it may cause some places to be higher in terms of their rates as far as filling up the tank is concerned and what that will cost for people. I want to look at some stories that are kind of flying under the radar, though, with all this distraction that's going on as far as geopolitical conflicts are concerned. What was interesting is that you could argue that the IRS is starting to be a little bit repurposed in the US. Have a look at this division that kind of kicks it off for us here at this press conference.
So with Senator Noel?
Mm-hmm.
All right, here we go. Adding it in.
Their leadership, and we also have the IRS here that's helping us track how these violent protesters are funded, what NGOs out there, what unions, what other individuals may be funding these violent perpetuators that are in these protests that take people who may be wanting to come and be peaceful, but instead turn these into very violent activities that go after law enforcement. That's just simply not acceptable. And I also
so there you go, Christy Noem mentioning that the IRS is actually looking into investigating where the funds are going towards the protesters. Now, what they've noticed with the big LA riots is that they're very well organized to the point where professional gear was going in, helmets and other things that were tools used for protesting in a more professional manner. And when you start noticing patterns, like in other protests we've seen, the same tent colors from city to city going up. Somebody's done a bulk order supply and getting it through those routes. And so she's highlighting that the IRS is actually going to look into these sort of things, where these funds are going. And people are going, awesome. Now the IRS is actually looking at some real investigation as opposed to what the honest Joes are doing in terms of trying to, feed a family, make a living and feed their family. So it's quite ironic, this. Meanwhile, you've got ex-Congressman Billy Long confirming as commissioner of the IRS, an agency he once sought to abolish. So this is really an interesting sort of turn of events as far as big taxation is concerned. Now, why am I making this a big deal? Well, you've got to understand here that when you see these kind of changes going on, people start going, well, why isn't this going on in my country? And that's the whole point here, is looking at what is really going on underneath the surface of all these stories. Now, ex-Congressman Billy Long has been put in there. He was confirmed on the Thursday, and he is what they're calling the beleaguered agency. AP News is saying this. The Senate confirmed him on a 53-44 vote, despite the Democrats' concern about he's a Republican. His past work for a firm that pitched a fraud-ridden coronavirus pandemic-era tax break about campaign contributions he's received after President Donald Trump nominated him to serve as the IRS commissioner. He was in Congress from 2011 to 2023, and he actually sponsored legislation to get rid of the IRS, the agency he is now tasked with leading. So he was getting rid of his future employer, or trying to get rid of his future employer. He has no background in tax administration. And, the IRS is facing massive changes. So not only are you seeing them looking into certain investigations as far as protesting is concerned, but we're talking including layoffs, voluntary retirements of tens of thousands of workers, and accusations that Elon Musk's Doge department mishandled sensitive taxpayer data. They're facing that as well. The unions, the advocacy organizations have sued to block Doge's access to that information. As you got to know, of course, the IRS holds a lot of sensitive data on Americans, and it's like the equivalent of the Australian Taxation Office. And this is really, really fascinating at a time when, the complete system is just an overhaul as far as America is concerned.
One thing I've noticed quite largely what's going on in America at the moment, and I've got a very special interest in this because we are actually planning to relocate there. The interdepartment cooperation that's happening since Trump's taken office is insane. Like, it's amazing to see all the different departments actually working together to work for the American people instead of the other way around. A prime example of this, and I actually think it's quite a good idea to use someone who wants to destroy something to put them in charge of it. And here's the reason why. It's not that he didn't like the idea or the concept of the IRS. It's just that it wasn't used for what it was meant to be used for. So if he's prepared enough to put his name to a bill to say, we got to abolish the IRS because it's not doing what it's meant to do, it generally means they've got ideas on how to fix that. Now, he's been in Parliament for a very, very long time. He's been an active member of Parliament as well. You got to remember, there's a difference between an active member of Parliament and someone who, like Joe Biden, who's just been there for 47 years, not really doing anything. He's actually been active. He's been sponsoring bills, putting things together, talking to the constituents. I actually quite like him as a leader of the people. I think he's actually a really good decision to have as the IRS because he's coming in with a fresh set of eyes, which is a really critical set of eyes saying, right, this needs to be done better. So when you run a business, you don't need to be able to do every single aspect of the business. You still need to understand how they work together. But I think he's got more of a business mentality where the IRS has to be run as a business if it's going to operate properly.
Well, we know from an interview from a so-called whistleblower from the IRS through James O'Keefe's media group that they're using technology at the IRS that's dated from the 70s, like going back to MS-DOS type software.
I love DOS.
And some people like that concept, but for them to just generate a letter to send to someone, it takes a long time for that process to go on. What you're also seeing is, Elon was saying we need to upgrade their computer systems, but I think, are we watching the IRS come to a slow end? And this is where I'm going with this. I think we are. I think that you've got politicians in the United States who are educating the masses how they were better off without an income tax back in the 1800s. And that we want to do that and replace that with the External Revenue Service. So I'm wondering if we're going for a flip, that this guy has been put in there to bring this organization to an end, the IRS, and that will be replaced by the ERS, funded by, of course, the External Revenue Service by Trump's tariffs that he's doing internationally. For this to occur is a massive, massive turnaround as far as finance is concerned, the way it's conducted. And why am I saying this? Because a lot of politicians are looking around the world at this model and the changes that the United States is making right now and going, well, why aren't we doing this in our own countries? For goodness sake, you've got politicians who are educating people on how we need to get rid of the taxation system in the US. That's what's going on. The largest economy of the world is doing this. It's like a dream come true for many people, right? And so how long does it take before other nations start getting ideas, other people rising up and going, I want to put my hand up for public service and make these reforms in my country as well?
Well, there's countries that are already doing it where they don't have an income tax. Saudi Arabia comes to mind straight away. Panama does have an income tax, but it's extremely low. They do more of a consumption-based tax than what's instead of an income tax. Corporation tax is minuscule in Panama. Another tax haven, but they're making half decent money. Their debt to income ratio is actually relatively quite good, but they do have the Panama Canal, so they've got a really good source of income there. But Saudi Arabia, a lot of the Arab countries don't actually have an income tax. Turkey is another one. So I can't see why other countries can't implement it, especially if you're exporting natural resources. Like Australia, vast amount of our resources are exported. Most of our income actually comes from exports. So why can't we start taxing resources properly when they get sent offshore and reduce our income tax for the everyday person? So I have to give a shout out to the Aussie punter, punters politics, he's really good at bringing issues about that one as well. So I've just done a quick Google search. According to the IRS website, in the financial year ending in 2024, they actually raised $5.1 trillion for the year. So that's what the everyday American people paid to the IRS. So if you're having a look at these tariffs that Trump's put on, he was saying something like last month it brought in over $66 billion worth of tariffs alone. And so these tariffs haven't, the exports have been all over the shop. So there is definitely income coming in from the tariffs. If you start taxing corporations at a half decent rate, so they want to be there paying their corporations tax instead of the income tax, I think it's very, very viable. I think this is a very viable option, and I think it's going to be a huge win for the American people.
And coupled with that, Travis, you've got situations where you've got the investment going into the United States as well. So to avoid those tariffs, companies are being encouraged to onshore their manufacturing in the US. And you've also got foreign players, you've got Nippon Steel going in with US Steel and buying the company, but allowing the majority of the ownership to happen on US ownership and staying on US soil to actually do the work. You've also got, Trump's recent trip to the Middle East, and that was like $6 trillion worth of investment going into the United States, not just in Boeing and airplanes, but defense as well, not to mention artificial intelligence. That was where the big spend is. These Saudi Arabian countries and the Arabian countries, the Middle East, Saudi Arabia and more, they want access to AI. They want to be at the forefront of that. And I can understand why they want to start diversifying now. As far as their investments are concerned, they have been living on oil and done very well for decades on that. But, you reach a point in wealth where you go, okay, maybe I need to diversify because the world is changing. And I suspect a lot of that has been going on in their minds. So this is big. Plus, they've got ambitious projects to set up major cities on the Persian Gulf there, where, they are 6 hours from all major capital cities in the world. So it's a very strategic point, particularly when you look at where Saudi Arabia is placed there with the Suez Canal. It's massive. So, yeah, this is major stuff that's going on. Saudi Arabia wanting to position itself, I believe, as a big market world leader in the decades to come.
So the other thing a lot of people also have to take into account with these investments coming into America, that's continual inflow. I think the trip to the Middle East that Trump did was nearly $7 trillion worth of investments alone. The amount of yearly revenue that's going to create is astronomical. Because don't forget, you've got the people doing the jobs. You've got all the resources that have to come in, like manufacturing the steel, the concrete, and all the stuff that they don't actually manufacture onshore. And then you're hiring all the people after the construction to run these businesses as well. So the flow-on effect from those investments is not just like, $5-6 million up front. That's year after year after year after year, continual revenue coming in. So it's a phenomenal move by Trump. He's done really, really well in that regards. And regardless of what they say, it's a great move. And
what he's done right is he's hit it hard quickly and soon. He's got 4 years to prove that this will work. Now, 4 years, you'd suspect that the first 12 months, 6 to 12 months, are going to be basically getting that legislation through Congress and making it so these things can happen. I mean, he's just had a big win in the federal courts, appeals court, that you can do tariffs. He is allowed to do raise revenue through tariffs internationally now. So he's like, great, I've got the endorsement of the Supreme Court on this. That's a big deal. And so he's got, and with any economy, it takes time for the trickle effect to come through, right? So if you make a change in the economy, you may not see the effects for 6 months at least before it starts having an effect on the actual finances of the country and everyday Americans. And so he's hit it hard. He's only got 4 years to prove it and prove his case, and then supposedly hand over the reins to someone else to do that. And I think, once you've done big moves like get rid of the IRS, if that's on his agenda, then it's very hard to reestablish it in the next term and years to come. They're going, well, this is so great. Why would we want to go back to it? It's also going to be very interesting to see the relationship he has with the Federal Reserve moving forward as well. That is, of course, the international bank that sets the rates for the United States. There is talk of the Fed going, and that's very early days. came across this concept about 2 years ago. I only mentioned it to a very few people because I thought most people are going to think that's just wild, that's just crazy, it's just too out there. I would not be surprised that's going on. And it's interesting to watch the relationship between Jerome Powell, the head of the Fed, with, of course, the current president. So that'll be interesting to watch. Watch that space. So if you are eliminating the IRS, let's say the Fed goes as well. I mean, far out, we're talking about a whole different financial system. And you kind of see things setting up that way with the legislation they're placing with cryptocurrency right now. And they're getting a lot of that legislation through Congress.
Yep. So I want to just give you a bit of a real world example of the fact that these tariffs are actually working. So one of the biggest, hardest hit industries was actually the semiconductor chip. So NVIDIA, prime example of a company that was absolutely hit hard, arguably the hardest out of all the companies with these tariffs. So their share prices, when the tariffs first started, they were hovering around the 140 mark. So they dropped all the way down to 94. I think that lowest was $95. So that's a huge loss. That's about a 40% loss. And that happened over the space of about a month when they started announcing these the tariffs. During last week, they hit a dollar, I think it was $1.45, $1.46. So they've actually bounced back above where they were prior to all the tariffs being put into place. And our close on Friday, because I'm quite heavily invested into NVIDIA, they were sitting around the 141, 142 mark. So to say that, they've lost all this money, no, they haven't. They've just had to modify their business plan to match for the systems that they were in, which was the tariff system. They've done that. They've modified their chips so they can full import to China, which was a major player for them. And they've just had to modify their structures. And they've done that. They've done it extremely well. Their debt to asset ratio is still phenomenal. They're fine. And a lot of other semiconductor companies are in the same boat. Some haven't responded as well as NVIDIA, but all of them are climbing up really, really well. They're doing great. So I don't think these tariffs have actually hurt a lot of companies that bad.
I think, it's the unknown that people often overreact to. And Wall Street always overreacts to change and those sort of reforms. And it's either one or two ways, greed or fear. And those emotions are very extreme in the market. And so, it overprices or it always underprices what should happen. And you'll often see that smoothing out later on. Bear in mind that the Wall Street is incredibly manipulated as well by a lot of the big players in the game as well. So you can't always expect the price of a stock to be an accurate reflection of what it actually is worth. So, take it with a grain of salt. But yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, I think long term, as Trump warned, there might be a little bit of short term pain in this, but over the long term, I think it's a big play that he's doing. I think it's the right play personally. Time's going to tell as far as how that smooths out. I think the United States has got some great years ahead of it.
So should we, because I'm just watching the time, so 18 minutes past at the moment, should we jump on to the next topic?
Yeah, sure. Let's go over across the pond there. A lot of stuff has been happening as far as the EU is concerned and what's been playing out there. I've been a little bit concerned about this. If we have a look at this, the European Union has unveiled international strategy pushing digital ID systems and online censorship. And you've got a post here from the Bureau of Democracy, Human Rights and Labour, DRL. The European Union is threatening legal action against Ireland if it doesn't not adopt the speech rules designed by bureaucrats in Brussels, even after the Irish government dropped such legislation last year due to lack of democratic consensus. The United States is deeply committed to supporting freedom of expression and national sovereignty. We support the Irish people and our shared commitment to fundamental freedoms. Ireland has kind of been overshadowed by the riots in Los Angeles, but they've had riots of their own in the last few weeks. And the Irish are just ticked. They're really ticked at the moment on the massive migration that's coming on. I'll show you some posts of that and how they're showing up in the thousands in the streets. But it's really interesting to see the EU, the old guard, trying to hang on to the old system. Why is that? Well, they have heavily relied on the United States for stability as far as the military is concerned in the EU, mainly through NATO. And Trump has shown a policy of, you guys need to stand more on your own feet. With the big speech that J.D. Vance did earlier this year in Germany, this has been a huge policy change for them. They're kind of like waking up going, oh, we need to be more independent and sovereign here. While the Trump administration has preferred to deal with nations individually rather than the EU as a collective and whole. Great strategic move. I think it's interesting, though, while this has been going on, that you've had legislation going through places like England where to post something in their anti-hate kind of speech definition can end up someone in jail over that. And that's been a big wake-up call where they're emptying jails of people who've done what some would regard as more serious crime to make way for people who are giving their opinion on social media.
So prime example of that, Tommy Robertson.
Yeah. Who also did solitary confinement, right? And you go, for what? There are worse crimes than what these guys have been doing. You've also seen Macron try to take the helm here and lead the EU as far as policy is concerned. At the G7 that's coming up, he sounds like he's going to be a big advocate. He's already campaigning that Greenland can be helped out by France, I should say, as far as the rare earths are concerned and national security and all this is going on. So it's really interesting to see these power plays happen in the European space, where the old guard is going, oh, darn, the US is changing the direction where we're going. What are we going to do here? If we look at the footage that, Travis, you've got there as far as Ireland is concerned, and you'll have a look here as to the Irish rising up and really taking back. They are protesting about the mass immigration that's been going on in the country.
I love how there's an Irish flag with the US flag in it. Might just be just a bit loud.
Now, I believe a lot of this protesting has come out about from an instance where a crime was occurred. Many of the people identified that as someone who was an immigrant, and they're really concerned about it, and they want to take their land back, the Irish. So you've got this going on overseas, and the US Department has just basically voiced its support for Ireland against the European Union's hate speech. And this is a big thing where the US is weighing in on their surveillance. They're weighing in on what's going on here. Part of the broader campaign, Global Influence Digital Area, the EU is introducing sweeping international digital strategy, leaning heavily on centralized infrastructure, digital identity systems, and regulatory frameworks that raise significant questions about online freedoms and privacy. And they have, in their article, reclaimthenet.org, outlined that it's stressing the intent to collaborate with foreign governments on a range of areas, prominently featuring digital identity systems. So what you're seeing here is a real push by frameworks like the United Nations, the World Economic Forum, to have global tools ruling over sovereign nations and sovereign peoples who've never elected these bodies into power and in influence. And so we've seen a little bit of that push in Australia as well, with the move to get directors of companies to have their own digital IDs and make it mandatory. We saw that at the end of 2022, November. And now you often go to the post office and they're trying to encourage people the benefits of a digital ID, which I might add, back in the 80s, Australians, when they were faced with the idea of having an Australian national card, rose up in the thousands to march against that and say, we don't want that. What was really interesting about that time is the government said, fine, and Bob Hawke got it through by insisting that all bank accounts had your tax file number attached to it, so they could at least watch transactions going back and forth. And we've never been the same since as a nation as far as privacy is concerned, but also surveillance is concerned. And this is why I believe you've got the government pushing the work on the banks with the whole know your client rules. Let's face it, it's a terrible business model in customer service. No bank really wants to be doing that to its customers. But you've got the shotgun in the bank still, not pointed at the bank teller anymore, but pointed at the customer. You will identify yourself. We want to know exactly what's going on. And you've got many people and customers coming in when they want to get their money out of a bank saying, getting affronted with, made you feel like a criminal. What are you doing with that money? What are you going to do with it? So you've got this going on internationally with EU. You've got the United States a huge promoter of the rights of citizens right now, and of course freedom of speech. So you've got this tussle going on as far as the nations are concerned in terms of values, the rights of citizens, and this is playing out. And so the EU is trying to adjust to these new plays by the United States when they've really heavily relied on them for international security. And you've got Australia, doesn't quite know what to do with the United States right now as well, just playing real shy. And, is AUKUS going to stand up in this place as well? So, it's been a lot of push by those who identify themselves as freedom fighters to get to this point. And their war is certainly not finished. Their battle is not finished. But you're seeing the old guard still vehemently try to fight for this. Now, what's going to be interesting to watch is the G7 coming up. And, of course, Canada's new Prime Minister or President to basically, he's one of the old guard of Europe. He was a centralised banker of the Bank of England, I think it was, and, of course, been a central banker of the Bank of Canada as well. Is now the Prime Minister.
I have serious doubts about that Canadian election. So the new, I'm going to say president because I don't know what he actually is. He won huge majority, like 80%. He didn't live in Canada. He's a dual citizen of, I think, 3 or 4 different, or multiple citizens of different countries. And he doesn't even identify himself as Canadian. He identifies himself as British. So how did he win such a large majority? I just find it absolutely dumbfounding that he was able to do. You talk about the American elections being rigged. I think there should be some serious investigations into the Canadian election.
It's a prime minister because they're part of the Commonwealth. But yeah.
So it's again, I have grave concerns for Canada. I have grave concerns for Australia. Okay, I love Australia. I'm not done. I take Australian flag with me everywhere I go. I'm proud to be Australian. I'm embarrassed by my government. So to the point where to ensure our families' economic freedom in the future, we actually got out. We're out of Australia. At this stage, we're probably not going to come back. But it's one of those things where, how ignorant is the general population? And I get what you're saying. We've got one of the greatest generals for the freedom movement in Donald Trump now in America, to the point where he's putting threats on Europe, saying if you don't withdraw your hate speech laws, you don't keep the tariffs indefinitely. So to have someone with that sort of authority to be able to bully a whole country, well, not one country, but multiple countries, is phenomenal. I think it's amazing. I don't think Australia have enough people who are actually awake to what's going on. We saw it in the last federal election. We saw it in the WA state election. This was a grand opportunity for people to stand up and say, you know what, we don't want them. And people go, but, Albanese won with only 30% of the vote. But if you add up his vote plus the Liberal vote, you're still over 60% of the population are still voting to be dominated by the government. So it's just does my head in. There's all these people saying, taxes are out of control. So why are you voting for the majors?
What I found fascinating with the proposed Misinformation Act the federal government tried to get through was they were targeting 2 points. One, speech that was regarding the security and stability of the banks in Australia. And secondly, the integrity of the elections as far as Australia is concerned. Now, I looked at that. Sorry?
Did you see the exemptions to the misinformation bill? If you're a part of the legacy media, you're exempt from that law.
Well, this is what fascinates me is why do you bring up those two topics? I mean, it's kind of like, who brought that up? Why are you concerned about those two things? Of all the things you could have been concerned about, those two get highlighted. And I go, you've got to ask the question, well, why? Why would they bring that one up, those two up? And you go, is something amiss that we're not aware of? That's automatically for me a red flag that they would bring that up. They've played that.
Anytime they try and assess what someone can say, that's a red flag to me. And I've had this argument time and time again with people. Why am I so adamant that there should, I consider myself a free speech absolutist, to the point I actually had a radio show cancelled because I believed in it so severely. So to me, let's say you're talking to someone and there's a free speech law dictating what they can actually say. Do you think that person's going to truthfully tell what they believe to you in those interactions? No, because they're worried they're not going to go to jail. But if there's absolutely zero laws stopping someone from saying something, do you think if, let's say they are, I'm trying to think how to say this. Let's say they're a part of a group that society as a whole does not like because they put tattoos on the inside of people's arms with numbers. So if you read between the lines, you'll understand what I mean. So let's say that person does support that sort of movement, and then because there's no laws to say, hey, you can't talk about that. So he can talk about it. So he's not talking, trying to recruit people. Straight away, I know, okay, I don't want anything to do with that person. You've just saved me probably 3 to 6 months to try and find that out myself. I think having absolute free speech is the greatest thing in the world because it allows you to see the true factor behind a person, not what they have to put forward because the law states they have to put it forward.
Well, I think it's also important, and you've implied this in your comment there, truth, of finding out the truth. The truth has a sneaky way of getting out anyway. When people try to censor it and change things and that sort of thing. I mean, we're in the age of revelation right now in terms of everything's coming to the surface. Everything that's been hidden is coming out for decades. I mean, look at the release of the JFK files, right, that they've just been doing under the Freedom of Information Act. You know, it's all coming out. And people who are doing things that are wrong kid themselves when they think, well, I can get away with it. I can get away with it. You may get away with it for a while. It has a sneaky way of coming out. And the reality is an old saying in the old book, you know, the truth will set you free. It's true. And it's when you start, when things are, the light exposes what's going on, that's when we can actually deal with it and the wounds and the soul wounds in an individual that, you know, they're going through. But when things are linked with shame and when things are linked with crime and all this sort of stuff underneath, you can't set that person free. They're bound to it. So it's really important that we do have the ability to do that. And I think you've got conservative America just absolutely at a point where the politicians were not representing who they were, with a lot of this woke ideology that was coming through in society, in the narratives, and, you know, the rights of parents starting to be taken away from them in terms of how their kids are raised. That gets every parent, and especially the mama bear, fired up.
Yeah, both sides have had enough. And you saw that actually with the voting when you broke it down into the genders. Normally, the Democrats get a very high female vote, like the mama bears, as you put it. But a lot of the mama bears were actually switching to the Republicans because the Democrats weren't protecting their kids out of schools. And I think there's this huge realignment of what I think the terms progressive and conservative used to mean, say, 10 years ago compared to now. And I think a lot of people who used to consider themselves to be progressives, prime example, a long time listener to the show, Taz, she's, by her own point, she said she's progressive, so she gets into all of that sort of stuff. But yet she still supports the free speech and protecting the kids out of school, which is a very, very conservative thing. So I think there's this whole concept of people are either progressive or conservative. I think that's kind of coming undone, where a lot of it comes down to the issue. How do you fall on this issue rather than are you a progressive or are you a conservative? So that's something I've noticed. One thing I do want to bring up, because I have just noticed the time, the big one at the moment is the Middle East again. And you sort of like touched on the oil prices, what's going on. So I'm not going to sugarcoat it. There's a kinetic conflict going on in the Middle East at the moment between Israel and Iran. I'm seeing so many news articles, both sides of it. The financial market, especially around oil prices, is all over the shop at the moment. I do want to just get your take on it. We've seen what happens with Russia and Ukraine and what that happened to the oil prices. Considering Iran's not really a big player, they've got a lot of sanctions already. Israel, again, not really a big player in the oil field, but it is creating a lot of conflict in the area. Now that apparently Israel's got total air superiority over Iran, how do you think that's going to affect the markets? Because I have a theory on this one, what's about to happen.
I think the globalists have wanted a major worldwide conflict for some time and been setting things up for that. I think in the heart of it, I think Trump has wanted peace. You understand that why would they want war conflict? To cause chaos. And it gives, one, it's profitable in many areas, and two, it causes a lot of people to surrender their rights, because when they're being terrorized, they'll do anything to stabilize situations and give up their rights for that. We've seen that. History's shown that time and time again. So I think you've got a situation where Trump does not want the conflicts across the world going on. He is actually pushing for, of course, the conflict with Iraq and Israel to do that. But they gave him an ultimatum. They said, you have 60 days to make a deal, to make a decision. And on day 61, Israel made its moves. Yeah. Also seeing, of course, Zelensky in Ukraine. I'm not convinced that he actually wants peace. I think because he would have done the deal by now, and he hasn't been doing that at all. So you've got to look at, who's behind all this, why their behaviors the way they are. And you've got, I think, a lot of people just going, we've got politicians who aren't representing the people. And I think that old guard is getting removed, and I think it's going to stabilize, and people will be forced to move. They will either resign and try to do it gracefully, cover up what they're doing, or they'll be forced to step down. And I think you're seeing that play out time and time again. We've already been seeing this over the last 12 months. And so as far as, will it have effect on oil prices? Sure, it may do that in the short to medium term. I think Russia probably will try to take advantage of that in terms of selling its oil to China and other nations as well cheaply. Trump's already made statements about that, warning, hey, if anybody starts buying this, there's going to be issues. So you're seeing a lot of negotiation also going over rare earths, and that's a bit of a card that Trump is wanting to have in control of, which gives you clues as to where things are going or where things are setting up as far as commodities are concerned moving forward.
I'm so glad you raised the rare earth thing. I strongly believe that Iran was very, very close to having an actual nuclear warhead. And we know, considering the communications between Iran and other countries, they would have deployed it. So I think the strike by Israel was justified. I think it was very well executed. I don't think Iran's going to be around in the next 3 to 5 years. I think there's going to be massive backlash from the Iranian people against the government, like what we've seen in Hamas, where the Hamas citizens, so Palestinian citizens, were actually protesting against Hamas themselves. So again, it's the citizens who suffer out of all of this. But what's happening is, I think they've now stated in the Middle East, America doesn't have to do anything to shut down any country. Israel can do it. They've just proven it. They've taken total control of the air over Iran. And you can see, you can map all the aeroplanes, what's going through there. No aeroplanes are actually flying anywhere near Iran or Israel at the moment. They've totally locked it down. Jordan, Egypt, Iraq, all these other Arab countries that have been helping in the past have all just shut up. They're just like playing back, going, no, we're not having a piece of this. Now, going back to the rare earths, because obviously there's a lot of oil in the Middle East, but the rare earths are in China, Ukraine, and the Congo, the Republic of the Congo. So you'll also remember on one of the shows we covered that America has actually done a deal and stopped the war between Uganda and Congo, again, for rare earth. So I don't think the America's ability to get rare earths anymore is actually that bad. I think they've covered their bases really, really well. And a lot of the rare earths that they've been going after is also in Australia. So again, going back to the AUKUS deal, like Albanese is just weak. He's weak. So I hate to say it, I think Trump's going to take advantage of that one, and he's going to have access to all the different rare earths around different places. He's still going to defend Australia, because who's going to take Australia if America's not there to defend it? It's going to be China. And Trump will do everything he can to make sure that China doesn't get more land. And it's really interesting watching this all expand out. Vietnam has been doing deals with China. Japan has been, because you got to remember, after the Second World War, Japan's military was actually under control of America. So America's told them, right, you need to bump up your military up to 5% of the GDP. They've now done that. They're building military bases just off the coast of China. So all these countries that surround China now are all beefing up their defenses. Israel's taken the gloves off. They're no longer messing around with Hamas or Iran. And then you have to look at America also deploying into the Congo area as well, not only just their mining teams, but their military as well. And then you take it even further, America's putting moves onto Greenland, which is directly across the water towards Russia. So all the people who are so-called rivals or competitors to America now have severe American-led military presence directly across from their borders. So I think EU's got to just bite the bullet, pardon the pun, and just turn around and say we need to do a deal with America, because it's getting to the point where Trump is just saying you need to stop suppressing your people, come to the party, let them have their freedoms that they're entitled to, and then we will deal with you on a level basis. But until you do that, and Trump's proven it, if you're willing to play ball by their rules, you are extremely well looked after. If you're not, get pretty ready for some really, really harsh tariffs.
Well, we saw the celebration, the 250th birthday of the US Army celebrations, and that really was a display of power and saying to his enemies, hey, look what we've got here, the finest of the finest, the best technology, etc. As well as a celebration of a birthday. It was more that to the international stage, and they were watching. I think what you've got too is I wonder if Trump is holding a wild card up his sleeve, in that the United States actually has a lot of rare earths too, but not talking about it in terms of the national parks, forests, and that kind of land.
Could you imagine backlash if he did try to mine in a national park to get rare earths?
Well, they have just introduced into legislation of more forestation in the country. So getting back to why do we import our wood in the United States when we've got perfectly good forests and regrowth in our own country? And you wonder if
that's the big thing on that one. They're not old growth forests. They're re-established forests. So they're the ones that grow really, really quickly. They're the ones that are meant to be harvested. So just for the people listening, it's not like national parks that they're going to clear all these like 300-year-old trees. No, these trees are like maybe 15 to 20 years old. They're designed to grow really, really fast. They're like pines and spruces. They're fine.
My point is this: how much rare earth is the United States sitting on? And it's not kind of playing that card. It's kind of keeping that up its sleeve. I don't know, but it's an interesting theory, that one.
Well, a lot of the countries that have large reserves of oil also have large reserves of rare earth. So it makes sense considering how much oil America actually does have. So especially around the Seattle area. So that'd be an interesting one to have a look at as well. But yeah, no, I strongly believe, I think America's on the right path. I think Australia's on the wrong path. Whenever one rises up, another one falls down. We've seen that between the EU. China is getting absolutely hammered at the moment. Russia, again, another one getting hammered. So I think America's just consolidating, rebuilding themselves up to become the superpower they were always meant to be. And I think this is a very, very exciting time. So, yeah.
Well, it's certainly a big contrast from what they were 4 years ago, right, in terms of foreign respect, as well as their own image internally, what they project and what they are living as well. I think Americans have woken up and going, did we want more of that? And it's certainly a different America right now than it was a few years ago.
And the teamwork from within the government is the big thing that stands out. I've never seen this level of cooperation, and it's between weird industry departments as well. So like the FBI, the CIA, the IRA, the Department of Homeland Security, like all these different industries who are normally, oh no, that's our case, we don't do it. No, we're not giving you the information. Like there's all that big thing, no, I'm better than you, no, I'm better than you. They're going, hey, we just do different things. Let's work together. Let's get it done. And like, just have a look at the deportation operations and all that sort of stuff. How quickly the National Guard were able to put down those riots. They're just working fantastically together. So
not to mention internal audits, and you're seeing that starting to go through in England as well now. They're actually doing their own UK Doge, so to speak. And they are saying that there are reports coming out there's going to be a massive, massive overhaul, that a surprise or scandal that's coming up.
Okay, you've got 2 minutes. Final thoughts.
Well, there's a lot going in the world, and I think you've got to separate what distraction from distraction as to what's really, really at play here, what's going on. The whole, hey, look over here, but this is actually happening over here game that's going on. I love the fact that we're questioning things. We're seeing a case study unfold where people are saying, well, why aren't we doing that in this nation? We're starting to see the effect of that. Guys, the world is changing and changing rapidly, and the key is to prepare for it now rather than after the changes occur. If you can get ahead of the game, even from the investment world perspective, and have that education, and you can be ahead of the game. I think that's a smart way to play. And this is why I talk about this in such detail, is because if you know what's really going on, then you can set yourself up in the future.
And if you want really in-depth details on how to prep yourself for it, the email just address just went past on the screen. So it's Derek at blueskyfactory.com.au, or you can just visit his website, Blue Sky Factory. There it is right there, bluskyfactory.com.au. We're right on 45 past. So this has been The Greater Wealth with Derek Whitaker to my right, Travis Carter all the way from Halong, Vietnam. I'm amazed my internet held, which I'm absolutely stoked about. So on that note, I'm going to wrap this one up. Aaron, enjoy the editing, and we're going to get into it and enjoy. Thanks for the time. See you next week.